How you guys all doing? Welcome back to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host, Manny Maradiaga, live today on Wednesday, May 22nd, halfway through the week, and another round of stories around the NFL to discuss on today's episode. We're going to start in Dallas once again, talking about the makeup of their wide receiver room. Do they have enough depth at the wide receiver position, even when CeeDee Lamb is there? Is there enough talent in that room to get the job done? Also, the typical divisional quarterback rankings. This time, we're switching over to the AFC, in the AFC North specifically, and ranking those quarterbacks, plus diving into the interesting topic about the NFL expanding maybe to play a game in Australia, potentially in 2025. That is up for debate and still very much in question, but it is a possibility, and we'll get to talk about that later on in the show. So remember to like, follow, and subscribe to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast. And before I do start on the topics, I want to remind you guys, if you have any questions or comments, to use the tip and donations link, gsmcpodcast.net. By using that, I can see your question pop up on my screen and read your question on air. That way, get your guys' perspective on anything I say or on any of the topics I have on store for you guys today. It's a massive help for the show, so if you would, please use the tip and donations link, gsmcpodcast.net, with any of your questions or comments. But that allows me to dive into the first segment right off the bat. The Cowboys. Do they have enough depth at their wide receiver position? The Cowboys began their OTAs officially yesterday, being Tuesday, and CeeDee Lamb wasn't present to start the practices, but it did give an opportunity for the media, for everybody else, the coaches and all of them running the practices, to get a better look at the Cowboys wide receiver room. Outside of CeeDee Lamb, it gets pretty bare in terms of options, reliable options. I should specify that the Dallas Cowboys have on hand. You look right away at the guy that stands out, Brandon Cooks. I guess he's the number 2 receiver. He has the most experience. He was used the most last year compared to their other options. But if you look at Brandon Cooks now, he's 30 years old right now and doesn't seem to have that same burst, that same level of threat that scares opposing defenses with that blazing speed that he used to have. He has slowed down a little bit, and also just coming off of last year, not his best performance. 54 receptions, 657 receiving yards, and 8 touchdowns. Both of the receptions and the yards were career lows for Brandon Cooks, and not to say that you were expecting him to just, hit a wall like he did at 30 years old, but it is logical to think that he'll begin to slow down once he hits the 30s and so on and so on. So it's not out of the realm of possibility that this sort of trend could continue, but at the end of the day, with Brandon Cooks, you have him at 30, sort of in a weird area right now, a gray area where maybe he gets a little bit better potentially, or he just continues to slowly digress as the years go on. But even so, outside of just the total numbers that he had to finish off the year, he had 10 games in which he played that he had fewer than 40 yards receiving, so a lot of up and downs and a lot of inconsistency with Brandon Cooks, and he's supposed to be your number 2 receiver. So if he's in an uncertain sort of level of play right now with the Dallas Cowboys, you have to look at other options, and specifically at wide receiver, you had Michael Gallup there, but he was released by the Cowboys and he ended up signing with the Las Vegas Raiders. So the Cowboys are really just left with a lot of young, unproven talent with Jalen Tolbert, Jalen Brooks, Cavante Turpin, and rookie Ryan Flournoy, who they drafted in the 6th round this year in 2024. You guys might not know a lot of those names unless you're a Cowboys fan, or some of you may really know realistically Jalen Tolbert. But any of the other names, it is hard to really pick them out as, I've heard of him before, because really they haven't had a lot of action. At least last year, Jalen Tolbert had the most action, or saw the most action in games, had 22 receiving yards, 268 yards, or I should have said 22 receptions, and then 2 touchdowns last year. You look at Cavante Turpin, also the next player that got the most looks, 12 receptions, 127 yards, and 3 touchdowns. And then you look at another young player, Jalen Brooks, 6 receptions, 64 yards, no touchdowns, and only 7 games played for the Dallas Cowboys. So, not very confident in these other options right now based on what they've produced in 2023 and now heading into a massive year where it seems like, you hear all the all-in talks. Dak's on the last contract. Mike McCarthy's on the last year of his contract. There's a lot of uncertainty right now with all the major stars, and you're looking anywhere to try and get some confidence, some calmness around this team, but it is hard to do that when you have a lack of depth just in all of these positions. But on that topic, on the wide receivers, their wide receiver coach, Robert Prince, made some comments on their wide receiver room and what their expectations are for these guys heading into 2024. He said, "We expect all of these guys to make a jump. It starts with Jalen Tolbert. He made a big jump from year 1 to year 2, and we expect that same thing for him going into year 3. And then Jalen Brooks, he works hard, and he's one of those guys that's always studying, and he can play all of the wide receiver positions. So we're looking forward to seeing what he can do this year as well." They expect a lot out of these two guys. They expect them to make a jump. I'll give my comments on Coach Robert Prince's comments in just a few seconds, but you look around the offense trying to find anybody else that you can rely on, and that's where you get to the tight ends. Jake Ferguson actually had a very impressive year last year for sort of breaking out in his early stage of his career. He finished with 71 receptions, 761 yards, and 5 touchdowns. So you look at him, it looks promising. He has a pretty high ceiling for a young tight end. The Dallas Cowboys could use him a bit more, but in terms of expecting a massive jump, can you really, with a serious face, say that Jake Ferguson is going to give you the level of production that you would need from a tight end to get where you want to get at the end of the year? That's in question. I don't know if a lot of people can say that with the utmost confidence. And then comparing him to CeeDee Lamb, who obviously had the best year of his career last year. He is an all-world receiver, one of the top receivers in the NFL. He was the only receiving option that got over the 1,000-yard mark on the Dallas Cowboys roster. Jake Ferguson was the closest one, and he was still about 300 or so yards away from that, and he's the tight end. So the main question is the wide receiver position, and going back to what Coach Prince said, mentioning the jump, Jalen Tolbert, he wants to see the jump from year 2 to year 3, and also Jalen Brooks as well. They're expecting a jump. What do you mean by jump? What do you specifically mean by you want to see a jump from them? Well, a jump could certainly mean for Jalen Tolbert, he finished with 268 yards. A realistic jump for me is probably getting close to 700, maybe 800 yards at best if he hits the ground running right off the bat and he's looking like a lot of a different receiver. That's something you can look towards more with him. Cavante Turpin as well was used a bit more, but not targeted as much. With all these other options, to expect a big jump out of them, it is hard for me to believe that, just because you look at the quarterback and what sort of connection you have with him. Based on the stats and the amount of receptions these guys got and the amount of targets that Dak threw their way, it is hard to expect such a massive jump when Dak Prescott is almost unfamiliar with these guys by not targeting them that much in the year previous to this one coming up. So how do you expect Dak to now feed him a lot more targets to, produce that sort of jump that you'd expect out of these guys to really be a contender in the NFC? And that's really my next point, because, they always talk about the salary cap issues. That's the main problem. They can't go out and sign any other players because they are so handicapped by the salary cap. But it is hard to mention now how the wide receiver is lacking in depth. Then you look at the running backs, who a lot of the times people would say that the running game, if you have a very solid running game, it could open up the pass game, right? Well, they don't have a lot of depth there either. So if the run game is struggling, then you have to look at the passing game to sort of open up this offense a little bit more. Now you have defenses playing off the run a little bit, playing further back off of their receivers, and it becomes that much harder to really get anything going on offense because you don't really know what you have in these guys. Zeke comes back. Is he the same sort of player? What kind of production can you expect from him? And then it's just hard to see it all play into fruition, and having the expectations that the Cowboys can sort of get back to where they were last year, even making the playoffs seems at this moment, it might be a hot take, it might not be. It seems a lot foggier than it did in previous years because of all the uncertainty everywhere. The Cowboys haven't done the best of job of building up this roster through the draft, through free agency. They've taken too long to extend their players and really create any sort of cap space. And because of that, you get to this point where everything is sort of crumbling right now. You have a million things to worry about, and the depth of your roster is really suffering from it. It's not an ideal situation, but of course the Cowboys will paint it in a positive light. But depending on how this all plays out, maybe they address it later on, maybe they don't. It will be interesting to see how they start the regular season. If CeeDee Lamb gets a contract, maybe he doesn't, maybe he holds out. And then you really have to depend on these guys, where I'm not sure the Cowboys are really focusing in on really targeting these guys in 2024 to expect that massive jump. I don't think it's fair for these guys to have these expectations on their shoulders, but that is what the situation has come to for the Dallas Cowboys. A lot of question marks around it, where the Dallas Cowboys will finish and how they'll play out this year, Dak's potential final year. It all has to do with one another. We'll see how that all plays out. But for right now, it doesn't look great, honestly, for the Dallas Cowboys, but we will leave it at that. And in the meantime, we will head to the first break of the show. When we come back, I'll give you guys my AFC North quarterback rankings, plus looking ahead to potentially 2025, where the NFL could potentially be playing another international game, this time in a new country. Stick around to find out where that would be. You're listening to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on their face shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows where 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown, get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose that fits. I'm losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift. Oh, I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
Back here now on the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast to continue on with the second segment on the quarterback rankings that I have continued on throughout this week. Going into this one, we're going to go into the AFC North as a bit of a giveaway there with the number 4 ranked quarterback, but overall, I will start on the AFC North quarterback rankings. I got through the NFC. I've had a pretty tough time doing some of the NFC quarterback rankings. It was closer than I anticipated, but regardless of that, now we'll start again with the AFC North. And in my opinion, the toughest division in football. It has been for the last few years, and just watching it, being a fan of the Steelers, all these teams are probably in their best moment since I've started being a fan, where all these teams are really, really good. It's usually the Browns or the Bengals aren't that great, but all 4 of these teams have a lot of quality players. They're always in the playoff race. So it was very fun to try and rank these quarterbacks. So without further ado, just going back to the number 4 ranked quarterback I had on my list already, as you guys saw, Russell Wilson for the Pittsburgh Steelers. it just came down to the uncertainty around Russ, with his level of play. What quarterback are you expecting to get in 2024? On his resume, it is pretty impressive towards the earlier part of his career. He's made multiple Super Bowls. He won that one over the Denver Broncos, has played at a top level, was considered one of the best quarterbacks at the time when he was in his prime years with the Seattle Seahawks, with the Legion of Boom, and then a little bit afterwards where the pressure sort of fell on his shoulders to carry the burden of the whole organization. He did it very well. But then as it all developed, obviously he goes over to the Broncos. That whole situation blows up in the Broncos' face. They gave him a lot of money. It doesn't work out at all. And now he moves on to the Pittsburgh Steelers on a temporary deal. And that's where I get to my next point, where Russell Wilson is technically in a quarterback battle, depending on how you see it. I know Mike Tomlin has said he is the starter right now, but because there is that threat of Justin Fields, I found it hard to place him anywhere higher than 4 at the highest, or at 3, just because he might not be the starting quarterback at some point in this 2024 season. He will be 36 years old also in November, so that's also another thing. How does his body look? How does his level of play get affected by the years now on his NFL career? The arm is still there. He throws a beautiful deep ball. He is pretty precise compared to other quarterbacks that the Steelers have had, but his ability to extend plays and that magic that he used to create isn't really there, and that's not an indictment against Russell Wilson. That's just reality, how it goes as you get older, obviously. But for the Steelers, I think it'll be better than what they've had in the past. Over 3,000 yards, 26 touchdowns, and 8 interceptions this past year. Gives you some hope there, but still at number 4, he could be at the same level that he was last year, or he might not be, and he could get benched. That's why he fills in to my number 4 spot on the rankings. So moving on to number 3, we have the Cleveland Browns quarterback, Deshaun Watson. A pretty big year for Deshaun, in my opinion. I've said it before on this show. A prove-it year for him. He got that massive contract when he signed with the Cleveland Browns, or when he was traded to the Cleveland Browns. Then they extended him before he even played a single snap for them. Gave him one of the largest contracts ever. The most guaranteed money for a quarterback ever, if my memory serves me right. And he has only up to this point played 12 games for the Browns, just over 2,000 yards, 14 touchdowns, and 9 interceptions through 2 years. So that ratio isn't great. And also only playing 12 games in 2 years also isn't great. So he has had a bumpy start to his career as a Cleveland Browns quarterback. But he is entering now in a good period where he is entering those mature years where you'd expect these quarterbacks to be playing at their utmost talent and really at their prime years. He'll be 29 years old in September, so right as the season starts, and where this guy, Deshaun Watson, can hopefully, hunker down and be the guy in Cleveland, because if he can stay healthy, I think a lot of people believe that talent is still there. It's hard for me to say that it isn't, but at the same time, I want to see it, out on the field. When he has played, it hasn't looked particularly smooth out there for him as the quarterback. So if he stays healthy and he can iron out all these little issues, I think it could come well for the Cleveland Browns because they have the talent around them. So that also goes just into the final point with Deshaun, and the biggest point I want to make. There's so much talent around him. He doesn't have the accolades maybe like Russell Wilson, so there could be an argument there where maybe Deshaun could be the 4th-ranked quarterback. But in terms of talent around him and where he is in his career right now, he does fit in at number 3. But with this amount of talent around him, you have the running back, the wide receivers now, the O-line's great, the defense is one of the best in the NFL. If you can't get it done with this team and stay healthy for a full year, this decision to trade for him and give him that amount of money is going to be looked at as one of the worst contracts given out to a quarterback in recent memory. That's just how I feel about it. So he slots in at number 3 for me. Then at number 2, Lamar Jackson. A bit of a surprise, I would think, for a few people watching this and looking at these rankings. I am a big fan of Lamar now, more so than I was before, because before it seemed like he just was over dependent on his running ability. It just seemed like it was a bailout option whenever he couldn't read a defense right, or when all options broke down. He had this exceptional ability to just run out of the pocket and really be one of the hardest guys to tackle in the NFL. But now it seems like he got a lot more under control in 2023, and also just the throws that he was making, the arm strength, the precision also got a lot better. And I was pretty happy to see that, because with Lamar Jackson and how he fits into this Baltimore Ravens offense, everything is sort of built around him. So to see that development, I think it has worked out very well for the Baltimore Ravens. And also the accolades speak for themselves. 2 Pro Bowls, 2 MVPs, the second player ever to get a unanimous MVP award back in 2019. The only other player was Tom Brady, so in good company there. And also he's the youngest 2-time MVP since the NFL merger as well, just beating out Patrick Mahomes there in that race. But he really personifies this idea of creating something out of nothing, and just you combine that with the arm talent that he is now showing in some of the throws he makes, in some of the playbook being opened up for him a little bit with the options that he has now in Zay Flowers, and Mark Andrews is one of the most reliable targets as well. He has grown more into his passing ability, which is good to see, but now we're getting more into him, seeing him take this team where they should be, always in the playoff hunt, trying to get to the divisional round. I think with how good this Baltimore Ravens team is, not to mention you just add Derrick Henry as well, now the expectations sort of build on Lamar and on this team even more for me, because again, similar to Deshaun, the talent is there for Lamar to be able to get this team to the playoffs year in and year out at the minimum. Then you get into the higher standard of quarterbacks where you have to get to the AFC Championship game if you've won back-to-back MVPs or 2-time MVPs, and you have all this level of skill around you. It's hard to come up with reasons why you don't get there, or you can't find a way to get there. He has a 2-4 playoff record, which isn't great, and also he's yet to make a Super Bowl down the stretch. It always seems like there's something that goes awry, or maybe he makes a mistake here or there. There always seems to be something when he gets, just last year, to the AFC Championship game. If you look at that second half, it looked like there was just a lot of plays left out there for him to make. I was confused why they didn't run the ball a lot more. It seemed like he was overdoing the passing game and trying to beat the Kansas City Chiefs with his arm, where his greatest asset is his running ability. I know I just said he grew more into his arm and more into throwing the ball a lot more than just running it every time, but also you can't forget what got you to that point, and I think that sort of mistake there also entitled in with the offensive coordinator also not calling running plays for Lamar Jackson as well. That has to do with it. I thought that really just showed some level lacking for Lamar Jackson to really take that next step. You have to beat Patrick Mahomes. You have to beat these sort of quarterbacks, and Lamar Jackson is yet to do that in the playoffs. So with all the talent that he has and all the accolades, he still slides in at number 2 in my rankings, which means the number 1 quarterback in the AFC North. I stand by it, is Joe Burrow. The biggest thing with him, he just needs to stay healthy. That's the biggest issue up till now with Burrow. During his first year and this recent year, he played only 10 games in those seasons, and Cincinnati missed the playoffs in both times. During year 2 and year 3, when he played in all 16 games for the Cincinnati Bengals, he made it to the Super Bowl in one year in 2021 and lost in the AFC Championship game in 2022. So that really, it doesn't get any clearer than that, where when he stays healthy and plays the entire year, the Bengals make it really far and make it to the big game, at least in both times that he's gotten there, or just one step before that. He has a 5-2 playoff record, and he's the only quarterback to beat Patrick Mahomes, the only AFC quarterback to beat Patrick Mahomes in the playoffs. The only other one was Tom Brady, so Joe Burrow is the only active one to do that to Patrick Mahomes. And also, in reverse, Patrick Mahomes is also the only quarterback to beat Joe Burrow in the playoffs. So it has taken the best quarterback of this generation to beat this guy in the playoffs. I don't think that's just by accident or by luck. In the big moments, it always seems like he has no fear about the moment. He knows exactly what to do. He's confident, and why wouldn't he be? He has the talent to get there, and he really, again, is the epitome of putting all the talent around him to use and getting to where people expect this team to be. When you have a Jamar Chase, when you have a T. Higgins, when you have a pretty underrated defense as well, you'd expect them to get into the playoffs. But then when you have a quarterback like Joe Burrow, to get over some of those humps and hurdles that you encounter along the way, that is the really resume that I want as the number one quarterback in this division. And has some also just physical traits also that I don't think a lot of people talk about. He is pretty fast when he gets out of the pocket, and he has good awareness to escape and extend plays as well, which I don't think a lot of people think about, but he really has a complete package where not one area is really lacking and is really dragging him down. He has the whole package. He just needs to stay healthy, and if he does that, with the easy schedule that the Cincinnati Bengals got this year, they are definitely in contention to be at the top of the AFC and make another deep playoff run, again, if Joe Burrow stays healthy. But that is my list of the AFC North quarterbacks. Let me know what you guys think of it. If you agree with the order, if you guys think I messed up somewhere along the way, leave it in the live chat box or in the comment section after the video has concluded. But that allows me to move on to the next break of the show. And when we come back, we'll talk about the NFL potentially playing their first game in a long time in Australia, potentially in 2025. I'll give you guys some early takeaways on the beginning days of the OTA period in the NFL. Plus, the Jaguars agreed to the new renovations of their stadium. It should all be ready by 2027, so I'll give you guys all the details on that story. But for now, we're going to head to a break, and we'll be right back in just a few seconds.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
Moving right along with the show and into the next topic on today's agenda, the NFL may be moving to Australia for one regular season game in 2025. The NFL currently is already playing 3 games in 3 countries, or is playing games in 3 countries as it stands right now. Outside the United States, you have Brazil, England, and Germany as of right now. And according to 9 News in Melbourne, the NFL is thinking about having a regular season game in Australia as early as 2025, or maybe just as late as 2026. So it is on the cards for the near future. All the details have to be ironed out. But, with the connection that the NFL has with Australia, some players coming over from rugby and some, just Australian players coming over to try American football and be playing in the NFL. The one that always jumps out at me is Jordan Mailata. I know the Chiefs signed a rugby player as well. I just can't think of his name right now, but also there's another connection there between the 2 countries and just the 2 cultures, I guess you could say. So there has been already some sort of connection there. I figured it was only a matter of time before the game went to Australia. Not exactly sure where the game could be held as of this moment. Those details haven't been disclosed, but the Melbourne Cricket Ground has reportedly been in discussions with the NFL about potentially hosting that game, but again, nothing is confirmed as of this moment. And it also seems that who would be playing in Australia, who would be making that long trip over there to the country of Australia. Well, it seems like the Los Angeles Rams would be a very solid candidate and the favorite to serve as the home team because they have the sole international marketing rights to the country. Under the NFL's global marketing program, the Rams were awarded the Australian rights in 2021, so they're guaranteed with those rights through January 1st, 2027. So with this sort of plan, panning out in recent years, maybe 2025, maybe 2026, it only seems right that the Rams will be one of the two teams playing in Australia if it does end up working out in the near future. And with the game being in Australia, there's all this excitement how the fans will receive it. I'm sure they have had some knowledge of the NFL up to this point. Some of them might be big fans over there. I'm not quite sure about it, but how that all plays out, it's very exciting to think about for the NFL just growing even more. But in Australia, it's not like you're going over to Europe. Sort of the same time, close enough where you can have some of these games in the morning and be played over there at a reasonable time. The difficulties with Australia, it being so far away, right off the bat, the first thing is the 14-hour time difference between Melbourne and Sydney and Eastern time. So how the NFL plans around that is certainly going to be interesting. A potential noon kickoff in Melbourne would be around 10 p.m. Eastern time over here in the United States on the previous day. So they could sort of have that as a plan, or also 9 p.m. in Melbourne would be 7 a.m. in the United States. So even earlier than the 9 a.m. kickoffs when the games are in Germany or over in London. That could be another option, but working around that 14-hour time difference is certainly going to be a major hurdle to jump over. So that's one thing. Also, they have another option, maybe putting the game on a Thursday or a Friday of week 1. Similarly to the game in Brazil this year, a big travel, a big time difference. Well, not a big time difference, but just a lot of travel, a lot of miles accumulated over that trip. If so, the NFL decides to go to Australia. Maybe they make it the opening game of the NFL, or they have it on that Friday. I'm sure they're going to continue to do that. Why not do it with Australia? It is very far, so if they do it and have it on a Friday, that would give the two teams a reasonable amount of time to travel there, come back, and not have to play until next Thursday or Sunday, whenever it is. That could be another option, or just scheduling both teams to have a bye week right after it. All the logistical thinking about having that amount of people on a roster, on two rosters, travel over to Australia and have a great game, a great exhibition for the people in Australia to paint a good picture of the NFL. It takes a lot of thinking, so there is a lot of things to work out. There are some options. I'm sure the NFL will figure it out, but for right now, it all stands at a maybe. And it brings me to a bigger point where these international games, it seems like they're just growing at a very fast rate, and that begs the question, is it going too fast right now for the NFL? Is it expanding too quickly right now where, not to say that they're losing control or anything like that, but it's just something to think about when just a few years ago you were only really having games in London, then it goes to Germany a few years ago, now you're sort of experimenting with that, and then boom, you get another game down in South America for the first time on a Friday, to say the least, and now you're thinking about moving the game over to Australia as well, when you also have games planned in Spain as well in 2025, so that's a lot of traveling already for the NFL. There was already a good amount of travel in these schedules as it stood right now. The NFL has held games in London, Mexico City, and in Toronto from 2007 to 2021. And now, since that time, the NFL has doubled in the rate of games of the international games by adding the Brazil game, the Frankfurt, Germany game, and also the Munich, Germany game as well, and as I mentioned, the Spain game in Madrid in 2025. All of that is already penciled in. It has doubled since 2021, and now something that a lot of people didn't know, that I didn't know before I started getting the notes to this topic, that the NFL owners passed a rule back in December which would require all teams to have hosted an international game at least once every 4 years. That's the new rule that will come into effect in 2025. So previously, the difference was that every NFL team had to host an international game every 8 years, but now that's being cut in half to 4 years, which would result in the NFL adding a lot more games, international games, to their already packed and growing schedule. So that would bring the total to 9 international games from the 5 that they had scheduled already in 2025 to follow that new rule passed by the NFL owners. And the NFL is also, not to mention, trying to grow the game with the regular season games expanding to these other countries, but also it sort of follows in the trend of them getting set up to open its second international academy in Australia. So that, has the connections there with Australia and growing the game to that country. They're trying to get an NFL academy there. That is set to open, I want to say, in September or in August of this year. So you have that. It only means that the game, having a regular season game there, is only shortly to follow that. I'm sure London has the first international academy for the NFL, so it makes sense why there's so many games there. It will be the same situation with Australia, so if it's not next year, there'll certainly be in 2026. I think it's only a matter of time right now. And again, thinking back to that question, is it growing too fast right now? Because it just seems, if you're a fan right now, it seems like you're almost caught in a whirlwind where you have these international games. You're trying to figure out the times to those games. You have new streaming platforms as well, trying to figure out where the games are being played, at what time, on Christmas Day, on a Wednesday, on a Friday. Some games are on a Saturday. And now you have the NFL expanding a lot further out in international games, almost doubling the amount of games that they have had in recent years, from 5 to 9 because of this new rule. I think, yeah, it's going fast, and yeah, a lot of, traditional, I don't want to say old fans, but traditional fans will think that, this is too much. The NFL is focusing too much on the extracurricular things around the game of football and not, improving the game on the field. Some fans will say that. Some people will feel a certain way about the NFL going to these lengths to expand the game and grow it outside of just the game of football on the field. So I can understand that point, but at the same time, I think this is they're just caught in a moment where social media, the internet, and everything else is just growing around them. They don't want to fall behind, and they want to stick with the trends. That's why they jumped on Netflix when it was at its peak moment with the roast and also having other live sports on it. They jumped on that trend, and now that you have sort of experimented with these international games and have had a great reception in these other countries, the NFL would be a fool not to jump on these other opportunities. Now they're going to play games at the new Santiago Bernabeu in Spain, in Madrid in 2025. That's going to attract a lot of people at that stadium. Now you bring it over to Australia as well. They have rugby, the connections there as well. So it's going to draw a big crowd. It makes sense for them to do it, and fans just have to get accustomed to it. It is growing fast, but that's the NFL. That's sort of the business side of the NFL and growing it. You have to keep pace with it or else you get left behind. I think the NFL isn't naive to that fact. And again, it seems great right now for the fans. If you're able to keep up with it, you're going to get a lot of football. And if you're an international fan, maybe the game will grow and we'll get to you at some point. It is great for the NFL, I think, big picture-wise. It just takes time to adjust to it. That's change. That's the sort of period that follows a massive change like this. But I think everyone will follow suit, and in a year or two, it'll just become usual routine. But for right now, it seems like a lot, but I'm excited just to see how it all pans out. I love seeing the reactions at these other countries where a foreign sport comes in. I think it's going to be a success either way, and I'm looking forward to it in 2025. Hopefully, it comes by next year. So, in saying that, we will move on. A couple more topics left on today's show. Some takeaways from the early days of OTAs are coming up, plus talking about the Jaguars' renovation plans to their stadium, how it will be ready in 2027, and what new additions are coming to their stadium of the future, as they've labeled it. Don't go anywhere. Those two stories are coming up in just a few seconds.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Keeping everything going here on the next segment of the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast. We're going to talk about OTAs a little bit, but before I do that, I want to remind you guys once again, if you have any questions or comments you want to make, use the tip and donations link you see on your screen, gsmcpodcast.net. This way I can see your question pop up on my screen, read your question or comment on air, and just get your guys' perspective on anything I say or on any of the topics. It's a massive help for the show if you're able to do that, so please use the tip and donations link, gsmcpodcast.net. But in saying that, we'll move on and talk about OTAs, because now we're sort of almost getting closer and closer to real football. You know, it's not just conditioning and just workouts. It is a little bit more team-oriented. You have some of the offense going up against some of the defense. Still no pads, but it is something. You know, we're getting a bit more competition out there for these teams. A few of them started on Monday, and a couple more began on Tuesday. Some teams had their second days today, so just on some early takeaways from it, who's there, who wasn't there to start the OTA period. Justin Jefferson, there were some doubts about him maybe being there, maybe not being there. He ended up not showing up to the OTAs portion of the offseason for the Vikings, and also missing the volunteer program in 2023. He did show up to the mandatory portion in June last year when the same situation occurred with his contract. So that mandatory minicamp is set to be in June. Again, June 4th and June 6th to be specific. So that's really the date I have penciled in to keep an eye on for this situation and how it's going. You know, if he follows suit as he did last year, you know, this really isn't something to really talk about. If he follows the same pattern, you probably would expect the same result as it happened last year. He missed some portion of it, but he ended up playing the majority of the season, suffering injuries throughout it. But if he doesn't show up on June 4th and June 6th, then a lot of antennas will be raised as to him taking it a bit more serious this year, not attending these mandatory practices. So that's something to look out for. He didn't show up on Monday. I mentioned Micah Parsons also wasn't present to start the OTAs for the Dallas Cowboys, as well as CeeDee Lamb. Christian McCaffrey and Brandon Ayuk also were two more that weren't present for the San Francisco 49ers to start OTAs. Brandon Ayuk obviously dealing with the contract negotiations, and Christian McCaffrey just deciding not to show up there. Not mandatory yet, so they don't have to be there. And also, a surprise for the 49ers as well, a pleasant surprise. Nick Bosa was present for the OTAs the last few years. He hasn't been there during this portion, usually working out in Florida. He shows up earlier this year in Santa Clara, so that's a positive for the 49ers. And also in Los Angeles, or in the state of California, I should say, Matthew Stafford showed up for the OTAs. You know, that was another question because he was dealing with wanting more guaranteed money from the Los Angeles Rams past 2024. It was an optimal opportunity for him not to show up, again, because this portion is voluntary. But despite the contract issues, Matthew Stafford showed up to the OTAs, is still looking for that security, but he showed up. That I'm sure is a relief for the Los Angeles Rams, that he is still focused on this team and showing up. It said a lot to me that he did show up, as well as Tua Tagovailoa. Similar situation with him, trying to figure out a contract, in question about whether or not he was going to show up. He also was present to start the OTAs period of this part of the offseason for the Miami Dolphins. Quarterbacks are the usual ones that hold out, sort of. These big name stars are the ones that usually make the headlines about attending OTAs or not. But now we have a kicker, Eddie Pinheiro, missing the start of OTAs. I just thought this story was funny. I've never heard of a kicker missing OTAs or just holding out, I guess, for a new contract. He is on the last year of a 2-year extension he received in 2023, so he's looking for a raise. He is earning $2.5 million right now per year. That's 21st among kickers right now. Jake Elliott and Justin Tucker make the most at $6 million per year, so he wants some more money. He wants an extension, so he's holding out. Pretty funny, pretty unique situation here for a kicker to hold out, but that is that. In other news around the NFL, Rashee Rice was present for the Kansas City Chiefs, even though he is dealing with off-the-field issues, legal issues with that car accident he had down in Dallas. Then there was another, I want to say, assault charge. I don't have the actual facts on here to specify, so I won't comment on it too much, but there was another issue, legal issue that he was dealing with. But regarding all that, and despite all of that, he showed up to the OTA part of the offseason. He is still expected to receive a punishment from the NFL, so that is something to look out for. But he is present for the Chiefs, as well as Kendrick Bourne and Matthew Judon were two more that weren't at the Patriots start of OTAs. Kendrick Bourne still recovering from the ACL injury, so there was some warning there that he could potentially not show up. As for Matthew Judon, according to head coach Gerard Mayo, he has been in and out all offseason, so it's not anything new. It's similar to what he's done in seasons before, so it's not something new that he hasn't ever done. But those two guys aren't there to start OTAs for the Patriots. And also, one of the biggest news that I'm sure I will talk about more later on, T. Higgins has not signed his franchise tender as of this moment. And because he hasn't done that, he's unable to perform in the team's OTAs period of the offseason. That's a story that I'm sure will develop more and more. He didn't get the contract extension that he wanted. He was franchise tagged and still remains the only franchise tag player to not receive an extension. So I'm sure he's feeling a sort of way about that. You know, the Bengals have been adamant that they're not going to trade him, that they want him to play this year. But who sort of caves first now at this point? Him opting out to not take part in this voluntary, again, part of the offseason is something to monitor when it becomes mandatory, like a mandatory minicamp and things like that. He would want to be there. It is mandatory, but if he doesn't sign this tender, he can't realistically be there because of the rules. So if he decides to sign it or take in some of the fines that will come, I'm sure, by missing the mandatory part of the offseason, will be something to keep an eye on. But that pretty much does it for the early takeaways of OTAs. Just to start off here, you know, we are only in the early part of it. They will continue on throughout this week and I'm sure into the weekend before it gets more serious into the mandatory part of the offseason. But it is exciting. Again, the OTAs, there is more development there, more actual football, but you know, we just have to wait a little longer for training camp and for preseason. And then before you know it, the season will be here. But it is a lot easier said than done. There is a few months left. But for right now, that is where we'll leave that topic. And we have one more to talk about on the agenda. The Jacksonville Jaguars and their new renovations coming to their stadium is set to be done by 2027. But for right now, I will give you all the details on how it will look and what is coming to Jacksonville with these new renovation plans. So don't go anywhere. You're listening to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast. Back here now for the final portion of the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast to talk about the Jacksonville Jaguars. As you can see on the screen there, new renovations coming to Duval in 2027 is scheduled to finish. Last week, the Jacksonville Jaguars and the city of Jacksonville agreed on a new $1.4 billion project to renovate their current stadium. Each side, the Jaguars and the city of Jacksonville, will provide $625 million each, with the city of Jacksonville chipping in another $150 million on top of that. So because of that additional boost there by Jacksonville, there's not going to be any need for any new taxes necessary for the people of Jacksonville, for all the residents there. So that's a positive thing. And as you guys can see on the screen, the images right now of what it's supposed to look like look pretty exciting and look pretty awesome, pretty sweet, honestly, if it all turns out looking like this. Currently, Everbank Stadium, the name of the Jacksonville Jaguars Stadium, will be ready for construction in 2026, and it will continue to have these renovations done on it for at least 2 years before the new version is done. And because of that, 2026, the Jacksonville Jaguars will still be able to play there, but at a reduced capacity before 2027 comes, and they're going to have to look for another spot to play their games just for the time being. The plan for 2027 will need to be in play in 2027. So the Jaguars president Mark Lampig told the Orlando Sentinel that they'll be playing at either Camping World Stadium in Orlando or Ben Hill Griffin Stadium in Gainesville. Those are the two logical options right now at the moment. Orlando seems to be the more likely option for the Jaguars, just because there has been Pro Bowls hosted there, so it is a familiar spot to host NFL operations, a lot of people, so that seems to be the more likely one. But the plan has been confirmed, but also with this whole plan the plan has been presented to the city council, but the members are set to vote on it on June. At some point in June, they're going to need 19 votes to pass this project along further to then the NFL owners, which if the council approves it and gets 19 votes at least, then it moves on to the NFL owners meeting at some point in October, and at that point, that's the final hurdle they have to clear, where they're going to need 24 of the 32 owners to agree on it, and then that'll be the final go-ahead for the Jacksonville Jaguars to officially move on with this plan. But it is moving along pretty positively for the Jaguars, and it is exciting to think about with these new changes and new renovations coming to their stadium. Some of it will include a plan to make it 4 times as wide as the current stadium, with interactive social areas, a lot bigger concourses, and just different attractions for fans there down in Jacksonville. It includes a new state-of-the-art technology that'll be integrated into the stadium, so that's also how it looks so new and just why it was deemed the stadium of the future. There's going to be a lot more new technology integrated into the stadium, so that's something else to look out for. There's going to be some more stuff like shade canopy around the stadium to reduce the heat retention by 70%, so that's always great. And really just shade all over the stadium, because I haven't been down there in Jacksonville, but I've heard from other teams that go there. It's funny how the Dolphins do it, actually, because all the home fans and the home sideline is covered by shade, and then the opposing team has the sun beating down on them. And if you don't think that makes a difference, you haven't been in that Miami, that Florida heat. So to have all the shade on all the seats, I'm sure will make for a lot more enjoyable experience for the Jacksonville fans and anybody that decides to go to those games. There's going to be a 360-degree concourse area with wider concourses as well, and increased space for football operations, and just better vertical transportation to and from the stadium as well. The new and improved stadium, all the renovations you get from it, will ensure that the Jacksonville Jaguars will remain in Florida and in Jacksonville for a long time. There were some doubts there, just some hearsay around the league about them maybe moving somewhere else, but the decision to renovate over moving to a new stadium was pretty easy once they decided, or once they figured out that it was possible to renovate the stadium and it was a realistic option. There was no real choice to be made. They wanted to stay in Jacksonville. Once the renovations were a realistic plan, they went with that, and no real concrete thought went into potentially leaving Jacksonville. So that's a great sign for all the fans there, and this could also mean that it could be a future Super Bowl hosting stadium. That hasn't happened since 2005. So that, again, is exciting, to have a new stadium around the NFL and hosting Super Bowls. More people will want to go there as an attraction outside of just the game. If it looks cool and has all these other different attractions that attract people that aren't so fond of the game of football or aren't too familiar with it, that's always just a positive. And also, people don't need many excuses to go down to Florida. Why not go watch a Jacksonville Jaguars game if the stadium is cool and has all these nice attractions? That's also something to think about. And already the Jacksonville Jaguars have already started to implement some of this whole new plan to renovate not just the stadium but around it. They built a brand new 125,000 square foot sports performance center as part of the entire renovation plan, like I mentioned, including new practice facilities, new locker rooms, dining halls, weight rooms, all that sort of stuff for the players, and 2 full-size grass practice fields as well. So the Jacksonville Jaguars are going 10 toes down on this new renovation project. Hopefully, I say with all sincerity that it all hopefully goes according to plan, and this could all come into fruition by 2027, because it looks very neat and awesome in these pictures that they have provided across social media. And if they have to play somewhere else temporarily, I think that's no problem if it all turns out the way it does. The city council has to vote on it in June, and then the NFL owners have to approve it as well in October. So 2 more things to hop over before this becomes officially approved. But hopefully for the Jacksonville Jaguars, they get this approved. And if so, not only will they have a very exciting football team to want to go watch, with Trevor Lawrence, Travis Etienne, Brian Thomas Jr. as well getting drafted there, you add on a great stadium with a lot of different attractions outside of just football. You have a match made in heaven there for the fans, for everybody outside the game of football, to just go to the stadium for the heck of it. Even if they don't really care about the game, they'll just be there, and that's always a positive for the Jaguars and the NFL. Look what the Raiders did with their stadium, and how it looks as well. SoFi always gets a ton of people there. The Jacksonville Jaguars are in a good market right now to have people come down to the good weather and have the stadium there. It all works out perfectly for the Jaguars and their team to sort of step into this new era with the Jaguars, Trevor Lawrence, and build success on the field as well as off the field with this new stadium. It is exciting. Hopefully it comes by 2027, but for right now, it's all in the works right now for the Jaguars and the NFL. So that'll do it for this episode of the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast. I want to thank you guys all for tuning into this episode, and just reminding you guys to please like, follow, and subscribe to the show. Make sure to also follow us on social media like Facebook, Instagram, X, and TikTok for more of the network's content. And if you want to see more of me and this show, check out the GSMC Sports Network channel and the Podcast Network channel on YouTube, where YouTube shorts are posted every weekday, as well as all the live full shows are recorded and posted on both channels, as well as individual segment videos. If you don't have time to watch an entire episode, there are individual videos with each segment on it for you guys to enjoy. As a reminder again, tune in every weekday at 6:30 p.m. Eastern Time for more NFL and football conversations with me, Manny Maradiaga, as your host. Thanking you guys for joining me once again, as always, and I hope to see you guys back here again with me tomorrow.
Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. Yeah, I'm tired of shit, and the coffee ain't hit yet, damn, ain't that great.